Hi all. Thank you so much for joining this very interesting topic that we have. And for the audience, as you can see, we have almost the ideal mix of folks across the value chain of healthcare. What I'll do is we have really good speakers, so I'll minimize my talk and I'll dive straight into it. Doug, maybe we will start with you, right? So, Doug, you're now part of the pharma industry at Bayer. And before this, you were at Samsung, and you've done a whole host of other things specifically on technology for a very long time. As you know, and as we heard Megan and as we heard Uma Shankar as well, digital therapeutics is a very broad area, and it propagates across digital technologies, different type of software, etc. It's used for disease prevention, management, and all of those different things. But in the context of what you have been doing all these years, and maybe the current firm and previously as well, according to you, what are some of the key areas that you are seeing companies invest in?
Hi, Siddhant, and thanks for having me and everybody for coming. This is going to be a great discussion because I think it's a lot of multi-stakeholders here, and we're going to learn a lot from each other. I guess I just to introduce the importance of digital, from the buyer point of view, it's essentially core, and it starts from the top of the corporation and it's embedded into all of our businesses. So whether that's pharma, consumer health, or crop science, and because we're a science company, our mission is science for a better life. We're very focused. Our emphasis is really on real world data and real world evidence. Right. And so you see that integrated really across the business. You see it in the geographies, you see it in the functions, you see it in the methods, and and most importantly, you see it in the product life cycle. And so all of this is, of course, powered by data and digital science. The three areas that we focus on are, first the pipeline, and that's everything preclinical all the way through registration and beyond. So at the front end of it, it might be digital biomarkers, it might be AI machine learning or computational bio to discover new targets or new leads. It might be using real world data to identify cohorts of high responders. At the clinical stage, there's a big trend to use real world data, and the creation of synthetic trials, right, to replace a traditional RCT or supplement it. So we see a lot of that. Expanding just as we get closer to market. If we're in the market, we're always looking for new indications, and there's ways of using data to make that happen, as well as market access. So a lot of times we don't have reimbursement with the payers initially. So, gathering all of that data and taking it to the payers before we actually have that product approved is helpful. So there's all sorts of things along that pharma value chain that's embedded in the product. There's a whole separate set of digital opportunities that are adjacent to that pipeline. And sometimes they're point solutions. Sometimes, yes, maybe you're using it to recruit for a clinical trial for enrollment. That's a big pain point in pharma. Sometimes it's a holistic solution, the patient journey that covers a segment, of the brand. So a whole bunch of things that exist adjacent to the pipeline, and then separate from that, we have at Bayer. We're trying to create digital revenue. Right. So we're looking at standalone solutions that can stand on their own. Those tend to be things that take advantage of the modern product development that we have out there. So, all of the user-centric, features, the baked-in real-world data. And we look for things that, I think to Megan's point, things with that take advantage of therapeutic development. So really high quality standards and processes to really develop the evidence to advance it.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Doug. Suresh, I'll come to you, right? So Suresh, you currently are the Chief Tech Officer at one of the largest healthcare firms in GE, right? And I have known you to be leading their software effort for the longest of times, maybe about a couple of decades. So you have a lot of understanding of this space. Where are you seeing, firms across the spectrum invest in? Where are some of the key areas that you are, really interested in?
Sure. Hey, first of all, thanks for this opportunity, and thanks to Megan and Uma for nice coverage on, what is digital therapeutics. That's very important for the audience. I just want to add a couple of points before I talk about, what we at GE Healthcare do. Digital therapeutics is one of the fastest growing segment across, all the total digital health landscape, with almost CAGR of 20% plus and upwards in the last few years. And it is projected, to grow at the same rate till 2025. So this is an area you cannot ignore. Now, people like us who are in this space for quite long time, the major difference that we see between some of the telemedicine solutions that we already been offering and digital therapeutics is, this is calling more of, evidence-based, and typically there is a claim associated to the solution. So that's the major difference, right? It is not just about providing infrastructure, but also how do you ensure that, there is an associated claim and you're enabling all the tools and methodologies for the payers and, the patients, as well as, the providers to be able to, get over this, right? That's the most important piece. Now, talking about what we do at GE Healthcare, we are over 100 years in this industry and have around 50,000 employees globally working towards precision health, digitizing healthcare, and helping improving, overall healthcare outcome. Let me give some numbers here, which will kind of give an indication on how critical it is for us to be in this space. 3 patients are imaged every second using our imaging agents. This is across the globe. And again, there are 4 million imaging, diagnostic, and monitoring units worldwide, going from GE. And of course, every year, almost 2 billion plus scans are generated from our equipments. So that's the kind of data that, we are actually generating. Unfortunately, the problem that we have is these data is tied up either to the equipment or tied up to the department. This actually is a bottleneck. That's one of the things that we realized, quite a few years before. And what we did is, we developed what we call as Edison platform. And with this platform, our idea here is, it is basically on-premise edge solution, so that, hospitals really need not worry about what will happen to the data, whether the data is going outside or not. Of course, things are changing drastically post-COVID, but, still, if anybody has any concern, this is a pure on-premise edge solution, which actually has the ability to get all the pertinent patient information in one place. That's the most important piece. Today, we do have the data, but they are stuck in the department or stuck in the EMR. But Edison platform can get all the patient pertinent information at one place, which actually can help you to make multimodal AI models and multiple other therapeutic applications to be deployed on the platform. So that's one of the key things that, we have been doing. Now, once I have all the data in one place, so what, right? And what next? We do realize that, once all this information is available at one place, can GE alone go and solve all the problems? We do have presence in almost 167 plus countries. We have, strong customers with a very strong loyal base. Now, every area has startup ecosystem. We do have very active startup ecosystem outside US as well, right? So we realize that one of the best way to take the whole outcome to the next level is, why don't we leverage the startup ecosystem in multiple continents, right? So what we did is, we opened up Edison platform to various startup ecosystems so that we can accelerate the whole solution. And we call this as Edison Accelerator or Edison X program. And already we have got more than 10 plus startups onto our platform. And I'll definitely touch upon, one of the digital therapeutics platform or provider whom we have got onto this Edison platform, and how we are looking to progress to the next level. So just to summarize, we realize that data is important, and we have come out with a solution which will enable patient pertinent data to be in one place. And we also realize that to accelerate the solution, we alone cannot do it. So we are trying to leverage the overall ecosystem.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Suresh. Neela, I'll come to you now, right? And you have a really fascinating profile, and you're currently heading innovation at one of Florida's largest clinical networks. And before this, you were associated with some of the best academia, with Carnegie Mellon, with Dartmouth, etc. And not to mention, you're a mechanical engineer by qualification, right? So you have seen different worlds on the ground providers. You have looked at academia, research, etc. So from your perspective, where is the meat, so to say, right? What are the biggest areas in digital therapeutics?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I did work, if I tell you how many years ago, it'll date me, on AI in my mechanical engineering days. And we're now seeing this, 20 plus years into the healthcare space because this is a lot more serious. But the technology in essence isn't really as new, but the application is new and the use of it is new. And so, as we've all faced COVID, we've been able to quickly see the integration in the healthcare setting of digital solutions in telemedicine, and because of the need, and also in remote patient monitoring, for example, with pulse oximetry, to be able to triage patients within the hospital, in the ER, to be able to use it. But these are testing. These are, test cases because of the need. And so we're really early in the development and exploration into the deployment of digital therapeutics in that nature. And we're talking about human beings and people and care. So there are challenges that we're trying to address. And the first of that is the relating to the comfort and the knowledge of the utility for both the provider and the patient. We're talking about doctors understanding the implications of digital recommendations or AI. And so, like with any other tool, we have to be aware of it, adept at its use, and ultimately feel that it has a benefit. So I think that as clinical evidence of the efficacy of these therapeutics grow and these therapies grow, more patients and doctors alike will be open to their use. And then, the challenge is also relating to the FDA's acceptance of them, and then also to reimbursement. And as you know, there are a few digital therapies that are currently reimbursed, and the rules around them and the amounts vary both geographically and by payer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that's very interesting, your perspective on how to use it, mainly from the management of therapy, etc. Right? Shanawaz, I'll come to you with a different question set, right? And you are heading digital for one of the most contemporary pharma companies, Regeneron, and I must acknowledge your company's effort in helping get out some of the COVID management drugs as well. So I'm sure it's been a very busy last 1 year, and especially from a digital perspective at that. What are some of the biggest challenges that you have seen? Right, we've all so far seen a bright rosy picture that so many things are possible. We heard about Suresh saying how big the market is, Doug talking about the different things that others are doing, etc. But from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you see in this space?
Thanks for having me. Am I audible? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, Shanawaz, you are.
Yeah, as you have already introduced me. So I think, so just as a point of reference, so some of these are my views, does not necessarily mean these are my organization strategy. But, when I look at digital, I see that we're at a pivotal moment in healthcare history, an unprecedented convergence of medical knowledge, technology, and data science. And when we think about, either we think about the drugs, the devices, and now the digital therapy, one thing to call out is that everything, all these things do matter, but what matters is, all these products or the devices are somewhat okay if they are not driving any outcome, like care. So patient is at the center of this. And when I look at my role and the work which I do is I work across the value chain from early discovery all the way to commercialization. It is from a tech side of the house, it is from the data side of the house. So one of the areas that we look at, and especially in the COVID days, was just as we had to identify certain targets, cocktails, and things of that nature, how do we go after that data? How do we make sense out of that data? And especially in this day and age, in our industry, there's more data outside. And I think Doug talked about the real world. When this pandemic was actually emerging, we had to, of course, this was a lot of de-identified data that we had to bring in. But in near real time, we had to not only bring this data set, but we have to apply some applied intelligence to help shape our therapy. This is just on the drug target side of the house, right? Now, as we're going through the drug target side of the house, and without getting into any numbers, we're dealing with petabyte scale data sets. So not only you have to figure out how valid this data is, how clean this data is, but computing, dealing on the computational of it becomes a large challenge. And COVID pandemic was somewhat interesting. It actually, it gave the way to, or at least liberated certain thought process as to people who were a little reserved with cloud computing, big data, AI, and things in that nature. They all came to the front. It sort of helped those tech gain a boost, so to speak. And then the latter part, which is as we get into the preclinical side as well as the clinical, and that was where we also start to see some major transformation activities as to how we went about from identifying. So in some of the business, which especially folks who are in the clinical trial or clinical operation, in this pandemic, when there's no clinical site open, how do you run a clinical trial? It's a big question. I mean, people don't think about these things, but you got to still run those clinical trials. But before you can actually run the clinical trial, you need to assess a feasibility. These conditions were a lot different. Everything we have known for the last 2 decades went off the roof. All those playbook went off the roof. So in event of these techs, either that be cloud data, our ability to make sense and informed decision to help our either researcher or clinician or folks who are on the outside, they really came together. And so for me, it's been a privilege to be part of Regeneron and just looking at what other companies, even outside of Regeneron, what Eli Lilly has been able to do, what others have been able to do. But more fundamentally, I think as we go more and more, I mean, frankly, I'm still trying to get my head around all the possibility this has, and we are starting to see few areas, especially in how we can think about the digital therapy, and I know we don't talk much about the privacy. We don't talk about there's a lot of tech. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, since the pandemic, I think it was Neela who mentioned when you look at the startup or the investment which went into all these startups at that time, I think it grew like fourfold. The investment went in. A lot of those companies which were struggling to find a use case, they found a use case, right? So we saw that also. But now from a true, like if I were to think from a pharma and a biotech, I think we all been very focused on as an asset company, and asset is a drug. But I think we ought to look beyond the asset. We need to go more towards it as a solution, end to end. And that's where some of these notions actually kick in. And again, I certainly don't think it's going to happen overnight, but therapy by therapy, what does it mean? And it is not just a one app or one tech. I think the data, the cloud, how do we handle the policies, the data exchange, all of that has to come together, and especially in some of the more critical areas.
Interesting. Thank you, Shano. That's like a pretty broad picture for all of us to think about, right? Janet, I'll come to you. Janet, you're the only practitioner on this panel, and it's great to have you here, and we'll be enriched with your on-the-ground views. And you're also part of one of the most interesting oncology specialist medical EHR firms, right? And you've been doing some interesting work in helping with this particular therapy, and it's delivery, etc. So why don't you talk to us about some of the challenges that you have seen, both as a practitioner and then with somebody who deals with this humongous amount of data on a particular therapy. Just give us your practitioner's views, right?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I mean, working at Flatiron Health has been an incredibly exciting experience to be able to build software to help our community and academic partners become more efficient to ultimately take better care of patients. And what I will share over the last 7 years of building out software for our practices is the toughest place of adoption is really around behavior change. So you can imagine in healthcare and, in oncology, people work in those practices because they are so driven to be part of that and work really hard and believe they're doing the best of the best. And so when someone comes in with new software to help them be more efficient, there's a lot of resistance. And so what I've found, and I think what's made us successful at Flatiron, and some of our colleagues talked about this at the start, is really pairing closely. So when we build software, we bring a designer with us, we bring an engineer with us. Myself or one of my clinician colleagues are out in the field, really trying to understand what is the end user doing today. Are we able to help them see where the holes in their inefficiency is, as opposed to us telling them, so that they are telling us? And then with partnering with them, building out software that they're excited to use because they had part of the development, and we really are trying to solve a problem for them. I think the other thing when it comes to practices and sites is the end user is one person, but then you also have your leadership, who is often not the end user of your software. And so in order to get buy-in holistically in the practice where the software will become the standard of care for whatever the workflow is, we need the leaders and the managers and directors to say, this is going to be our standard. And what's been interesting for us is a lot of workflows were done on paper on someone's desktop. And when you start to build out a platform, now your leadership can have analytics and for the first time have a great understanding of how teams are working, where the holes are. So I think you want to have a two-prong approach when you're working with practices and bringing up software. And then I'll just speak briefly on the patient perspective of it. And I think I probably had this bias as well pre-COVID that, oncology patients are older, they don't understand technology, they don't know how to use technology. And I think the one silver lining of COVID is we've all been forced to use technology. And I think the older person who didn't know about Zoom or FaceTime is now becoming far more savvy. And my hope is they will start demanding of healthcare the ability to do telemedicine more often, to have the ability to use PROs. Patients spend very short amount of time in the practice and things are happening to them at home. So I think there's great opportunity there. But as Shar mentioned, we need to think about privacy. That's a huge issue in that we're protecting their data. It's something we think about always at Flatiron, is that we're really protecting people's data and using it in the right way. So I think those are probably the biggest adoption issues that we've seen.
Great. Good. I have been saving you up for some more interesting questions, right? And you've been leading the technology effort at Siemens for as long as I've known, for about 2 decades. And you're more of a Bangalore citizen than many of the Bangaloreans. So, and heading one of the largest Siemens centers here as well. So I'm sure you've seen this whole journey of initial use cases, and some of them moving up, some of them falling down, and now with Health in Years, I'm sure there is a renewed focus on some of these areas, right? But which are the candidly, which are the top 1 or 2 use cases that you think are really almost solved with digital, and what are some of the most interesting use cases that you see in the future that would get solved through digital in this therapeutic space?
Yeah, thanks, Siddhan. But let me start with a quote, which is in the meantime 10 years old. So in 2011, Mark Andreessen, he said software is eating the world. Yeah, and what he meant is that step by step, different industries will be disrupted by digitalization and the use of software. And when we talk about digitalization, I mean, it's not only the amount of data that has to be managed. From my point of view, there are 4 different aspects. One aspect is the automation of workflows in order to minimize unwarranted variations, to have automated products, automated solutions. The second one is, with the help of software, to create ecosystems in order to enable the community to exchange data. The third one is the support of the medical doctors in their standard work. This is when it's what the colleagues said before, when it comes to data. Yeah, of course, you have more and more data, but you also have to analyze them and then provide AI support. And the fourth one is really then decision support. And what we are working at the moment, I mean, the topic of, we are working, of course, in all the 4 different areas. But as you mentioned, 2 examples, or that you would like to have 2 specific examples. One is a platform to create an ecosystem that is called TeamPlay. Mm-hmm. And TeamPlay enables the owners of a hospital or of modalities to connect to this platform. And this is independent from the brand. So everybody can connect to this platform and then get, let's say, informations, insight on the performance, exchange information about it, get insights on the dose, on the usage, on protocols, and all these kind of things. And in the meantime, we have more than 20,000 ecosystems connected to this platform TeamPlay. Another example, which goes in the direction of the usage of AI in decision making, this is called AI Pathway Companion. And pathway companions typically are specific to a disease. And for example, prostate cancer is one pathway companion that we have, and that starts from diagnosis to the therapeutics till somebody finally is recovered, where we make use of all the data that is available from the diagnostics imaging, from laboratory diagnostics, so all information that is available about a patient, where you also can compare, let's say, about the information from other people who may have a similar disease and support the doctor in the decision making and finding the best possible treatment in order to ensure that the person becomes, well, healthy as quickly as possible again.
Wow, what a collaborative platform in a space that's typically not known a lot for collaborating across different areas, right? That's very interesting initiative, Gert. Mm-hmm. Talking about collaboration and different parts of the ecosystem, Sarika, you are almost the only person who has, seen companies and use cases across the spectrum, right? Payers, providers, pharma companies, tech companies, you name it, and you would have seen all of them, right? And according to you, what are the top use cases and top areas that you are very excited about?
So thank you so much for having me on the panel. It's so nice to be part of this enriching conversation, and amongst all the experts in different areas, and bringing best of the knowledge and information. So thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about slightly different way of presenting digital therapeutics. Everybody's already talked about, Gerd talked about, 4 major areas of use cases, and there are plenty of them within each of these areas that people would want to, implement. And you're right, we've been working with payers, providers, med devices, pharma to sort of build digital therapeutics use cases, and each one of them is special and unique, and we see the advantages. Not even, we don't even have to wait for them to get deployed, but while building them, while we go through the clinical trials, it's very useful for to see how patients benefit out of that. But one of the ways digital therapeutics is different in my mind is where the subjective evaluation of the treatment. There are a lot of therapeutic areas that depend on subjective and objective evaluation, and many places the clinicians have to use their expertise to evaluate how the patient is progressing. Patient has to depend on them, their skills, and for whatever reason, if they're if the skilled personnel, the clinicians, the experts are not available, the care is going to suffer, outcome is going to suffer as a result. And that's where I truly believe that digital therapeutics play a major role because of the technology, the KPIs can be defined to objectively evaluate the treatment that can be quantitatively measured using technology biomarkers. Neela already mentioned technology has been existing for a very long time. There's nothing that we're in digital therapeutics that we're building or using that was not discovered at least 10 years ago. But like she said, application is different, the usage is different, and that's where the difference lies. So I'm just going to take an example of what I was talking about earlier. Consider rehab, right? Somebody's gone through knee replacement surgery and they go to the therapist office and do the physical therapy with the help of a very able, capable, skilled physical therapist. Consider the situation that we're now in. People can't go to the therapist, can't go to the office, therapy office. They have to recover at home. They have to do the therapy at home, and they're not sure whether whatever that they're doing is helping, not helping, and it can get very frustrating. Now, imagine that they are doing the therapy in front of a smart mirror where the camera is, looking at the patient, and they are, trying to increase the range of movement, range of motion on the leg, few degrees more every day, every week, right? But this time the camera is measuring the movement of the leg, measuring the degrees of angle that they're moving, and providing the guidance to the patient real time every day that, hey, you did this much yesterday or day before, do a little bit more, nudge them, motivate them. And, with real time guidance, let's say with a stick figure overlaid as a guiding mechanism to them. So this is, I would say, perhaps a little bit better than the physical therapist standing next to them and guiding them, because you now know how objectively can be measured about the progress. Maybe the care improves and the recovery is faster. But these are the ways where technology is going to play a different, perhaps a better role than the standard of care. And that's how I would say all of us are going to benefit. We're going to go extra step and provide more value to all the stakeholders.
That was an interesting use case. Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Sarika. I'll just, try and focus a little bit on the pharma area right now in this question. And one of the things that we've noticed from when we track the market and the numbers there and who seems to be putting in a lot more dollars more recently, especially, we see that the pharma space is, almost taking the lead in many of these DTX initiatives per se. And one of the things that we would like to understand is, one, what is the biggest driver for that, right? So Doug, if I were to ask you, why do you think the pharma companies are really taking this initiative? Because I mean, to a layman, if I'm sick, I will need a medicine, right? So what is the big impetus on the digital portion of therapy here? And even when in these areas, if you could point out, say, one or two top areas that can help us understand the interest of pharma companies in this particular space.
Okay. So I think the trend that's driving all of it for us is this new layer of healthcare built around the individual. So the self-care that Sarika was alluding to, and so that's really about the patient and what's best for them. And I distinguish that between that individual personalization focus versus, say, population health and cohort development around other targeted therapies, for instance. So what that really means, okay, when we think about it, is the patient's in control, and that's really what's happening in the world going forward. So I guess more practically speaking, that means if Siddhant, if you were the patient, okay, you would analyze your own data, okay, you would decide on your own data, okay, and you would pre-authorize people to pull your data and run services for you, okay. So if you have that setup, then you're able to be the steward of your own care, and you're able to control your own spend. I mean, that's really the way we think about it. And when you have that new experience, you're now able to connect with the patient in a new journey. So this new experience. And so for us, what that means is, it just very simply at the organizational level, is we have to connect that patient journey to the franchise journey and the brand journeys. Okay, if there's dislocation in any of those three journeys, and the patient journey is the core one, we're out of business, right? And we're just going to miss the mark. So I mean, that's really
okay.
Core point of view.
Shana, was the same question to you, right? And in your, do you agree with what has been told, and do you want to add something on those areas, or a different perspective altogether?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with Doug. I think, and I think we all, and it's my view, and I think in some way, if you look at what some pharmas and other biotechs are starting to really consider, I think it's a wake-up call for everyone. And Doug said it right. And I always say that no two patients are the same, right? Industry have been so focused on this big clinical trial, which is just sampling, right? And I think, if we look deeper into what COVID did, I think there's a lot of stories and a lot of assumptions, a lot of hypotheses which really were challenged. And for those, so it was a tipping point for a lot of that. And as I was saying earlier, is that in ideal world, outcome matters more than the product use, right? We can never, all these, cloud is great, data is great. We can sit here and talk about, I'm big on privacy and AI. Half the time, that's what I'm working on. But even getting the right insight to the patient device, we're trying to figure out how do you quantify the explainability of that. We're still early in that. So some tech is there, some tech is not there, but it has to go that way. It has to go that way. Otherwise, I would think pharma and biotech will be out of business, right? I think payer will be the next biotech, or the provider will be the next biotech, right? It's if you start to think about where this is headed, and who's in control of the data, and what's in it for the patient, I think we lose that fight, right? It is for the patient, and if you make it about the patient and start to create an ecosystem around that, I think there are new experiences and new ways by which we can truly accelerate the health system. So.
Great. That's very interesting, Shanawaz. More apocalyptic as well. Yeah. So Neela, I'll come to you, and I want to discuss specifically on the space that we have seen the most disrupted over the last 1 year, and that's specifically the provider space. And I'm sure we've discussed in other roundtables and other areas as well on how providers are disrupted and how digital is helping, etc. But at the same time, what I want to discuss is post-pandemic, what are the top areas that you still see that will continue? And more importantly, in this particular space, what are the top digital use cases that you're really excited about in terms of things that might happen in the next couple of quarters or years?
Well, I think that the pandemic demonstrated that telemedicine can be beneficial for both the provider and the patient, and it kept people safe, at this point in time. But this doesn't mean that there are not patients or doctors who prefer the traditional in-person interventions. But similarly, there are definitely those who will maintain preference for digital type appointments. So you're seeing a layering of options. And I've seen that even for my own children, you know, whether you would want to go have an in-person and then we also have to think about our parents as we're also taking care of our families. So when you think about things like chronic disease maintenance, there's a real opportunity in this area, such as diabetes, and you're seeing a lot in the area of mental health. There will be continued focal points for continuing offerings. You're seeing this mental health in the VC space getting a lot of traction as well. But from the lens of other than disease states, I'd say that digital therapeutics will focus on user friendliness, focus on elderly users, and the disparities with a focus on communities requiring access to digital infrastructure, and evidence-based studies interrogating efficacy, cost savings, and convenience.
Wow, interesting. Cool. So Janet, from your perspective, right, and if you want, you can keep it focused on oncology. Same question. What are the top areas that you're excited about, maybe post-pandemic, and also, coming in the next, not very long time, but maybe in a year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo what Neela just said, is telemedicine. I just can't believe that can go away. I mean, that needs to stay front and center. And when we think about prospective clinical trials, I think Doug and Shah both brought this up, that we need patients to get on trials. And as somebody who was in practice in a rural northern Colorado, I had patients that would have been eligible for a trial, but the hardship of coming to the clinic for all the appointments made them say no, that they could not commit. And that's right in the consent form. But I think we've proven over the last year that they maybe don't have to come in for every single visit, or the blood work does not have to be done at the center and could be done at an external lab. And that's just going to help the entire ecosystem if we're allowing patients to get on trial who might otherwise not. So I think that will be critical. I also think what we saw over the past year is the ability for sponsors to monitor remotely. You know, in the past, they had to come on site. They took a lot of time from the PIs, the research staff. But interestingly, over the past year, they were able to log in. We're all on EHRs now, and the ability to do things remotely, I think that is here to stay. And you know, maybe I'm being naive, but perhaps we can move faster to data lock if we're doing things in a remote fashion and someone's not flying 3,000 miles to go do a monitoring visit. So I think from a clinical trials perspective, both of those are going to stay. And again, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, I'm really excited to see where PROs may go. Again, to Neela's point, it has to be friendly and easy for the user to use. There will certainly be challenges. So where's that data going in the EHR? Who's looking at it? Wouldn't want things to be missed, but I think we have great opportunities. And somebody who works in healthcare tech, I'm very excited to what the future is going to bring.
Perfect. Interesting. So we heard very similar things from both providers and yourself, right? And then also from the pharma guys in terms of telemedicine, in terms of patient collaboration, etc. And I want to now, move to the, the tech providers in this ecosystem, to Suresh and Gerd, right? So, and the areas that you are seeing, which are most important from a partnership perspective. So where are you seeing, maybe I can start with Gerd first this time. Gerd, where are you seeing the need for this very tightly knit partnership, right? And because at least from my experience of quite a few years, we've always seen the tech world being farther ahead in terms of innovation and technology. For example, whatever the providers are using now is something that has existed for many, many years. So maybe if we were collaborating better, faster, it could solve some of these challenges. So Gerd, in your mind, where are some of these areas where, and I know that Health Indias is trying to do a lot of collaboration as well, which are the top couple of areas that you think are where partnership is the most effective in propagating digital therapy?
Well, see, let me look a little bit in the future and talk about our vision of healthcare of the future. Yeah, in principle, in healthcare, you have two fundamental questions. One question is, how am I? That means, what is my status of health? And if you figure out that you have some health problems, then the second question is, what is my path to health, to becoming healthy again? And the way you answer the question, how am I today, is usually with diagnosis, that you look at, let's say, diagnostics imaging, that you analyze body fluids and so on and so forth. In the future, we believe that you will be able to answer this question with a digital twin of an individual. Yeah, so you will have a digital twin of yourself where you know exactly how you're doing and where you also can simulate, if you don't change your behavior, what will happen, how your health will change or improve over time. Yeah, because the minute you have a digital twin,
that will solve Shahnawaz's clinical research and clinical trial problems.
That will solve those problems, and then all of a sudden we are today when we talk about health care. Yeah, I mean, we talked about patients, but in principle we talk about the people are falling sick, and then we are acting. When you have the digital twin, you can become proactive, and then it's no longer about healthcare only, it's about well-being and ensuring that people stay healthy. And in case they fall sick, then you will have the pathways, which I mentioned before, and the pathway will give you the indication how to come back again to a healthy state. So the future of healthcare from our point of view will be a digital twin who tells you how you are and where you can simulate how you might be. And in case you fall sick, then the pathway companions which bring you back in a healthy state.
Siddhanta, I want to add something. Can you hear me?
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Shahnawaz.
So another way to look at it is, so in pharma and biotech and anyone who's doing research, and the way the research has been going, it's been very mechanical, very biological driven. There's a new construct, and there are a few organizations already out there. So the social genomic, right? It is now really playing a key part into it. And there's evidence, or at least there are cited papers out there and so forth, that the social aspect have a pretty significant play on the impact and the care and the medicine and so forth and so on. So I see a convergence of that a new therapy, new medicines, the social aspect will also be taken into account. And this is where the stress, the conflict, the isolation, behavior, mental health, taking those, even climate, right? Depending on which part of the world you're living in, your body may react differently, your age group, your demographic, and all that has an impact. So, and again, that's where, when I look ahead, I said, okay, that has to come in, at least from as we think about clinical development and how we shape therapy.
Interesting. So I didn't hear of this thing before, social therapy, and Gerd gave us something of a digital twin of a person itself. Wow, that's going to be cool, I guess.
Yeah.
Suresh,
So,
go ahead, yes.
Yeah, talking about partnership, I'll Gerd touched upon what is a possibility. I'll also talk about how do we leverage the ecosystem and partnership. That was the question to me. Sometime back, I talked about how Edison platform actually provides one point to get all the patient-related data into one place, right? So once you get the data, you have enormous possibilities. I can talk about two examples. One example is, for example, we have a solution called Mural. Mural is an application on top of the Edison platform. And what Mural does is it's a digital canvas. It is a digital canvas which can actually give you the imaging information, critical care information. You can also actually have a video. You can actually watch the patient, while in the bed, and there's a possibility to even, extend beyond in future, right? Especially for COVID scenario, we try to utilize in a different ways, right? In that, you can actually integrate, depending upon the region, depending upon the department, various solutions. For example, there is a possibility that if there is already a solution done by some hospital, they can actually integrate that solution as part of the mural. That is why we call it as mural, as it is a digital canvas. People can actually come and put their application seamlessly, leveraging the existing ecosystem as well as the data. So this is one possibility which is already there today, and it is it is right now in US, and very soon we are planning to expand it beyond US. The second one, which we are also doing is, as Edison has all this information, there could be multiple solutions, but GE alone cannot solve all of them. We know that there are several startups across the globe. So what we have done is we have opened up this Edison platform to startups. One of the startups that I can talk about is Wealthy Therapeutics. Wealthy Therapeutics is actually a leading digital therapeutics company in Europe and Asia. And apart from pharmacovigilance, vigilance and adverse event tracking, they also provide population health analytics and certain other aspects as well. Now, this is an area which we don't play at all. Now, by getting Wealthy Therapeutics onto this platform, we are able to actually provide a continuum of care for that particular patient, starting from the hospital at the home, right? So that's the kind of ecosystem play Edison provides right now. So these are some of the examples. One last item that I would like to really touch upon is we are right now majorly focused on chronic disease management, right? There is a possibility that with all the data that we have, now you get the genetic data also into play. You have possibility of avoiding some of these chronic scenarios down the line. I think that's the future that we are thinking right now.
Wow, interesting. So it's almost like predictive prevention.
Right.
Interesting.
I had a comment.
Yes.
Suresh Kumar, and I'll give you a pharma and a researcher vantage point. So, as a technologist, I always find myself in the middle. All these techs are great, and platform you talked about are great, but the typical researcher and biologist or scientist, and I think there was someone who mentioned earlier, the need for evidence citation is so critical, right? And I have yet to come across any scientist or researcher who is just gonna, because they're known to do certain things certain way, and until they can really see the numbers, see the evidence, and get a peer review, only then they may opt into it, right? And I think sometimes we do talk about AI and all that, and all these augmentation and applied learnings are great, but I think there's not enough that is being done around the explainability, evidence, and how do we get into a workflow, because it's going to eventually have to happen for researchers, scientists to adopt this at scale, and not even just on the researcher, on the patient side, right? It cannot be a black box, right? If I'm going to look at my credit score, I better know where the numbers are coming from, right? Right?
Yeah.
It's that, and I think that's been, at least when we look at some of the impediments and what we need to solve, I think if we can do something around that, and again, maybe we need another forum to talk about that, but I'm giving you
that's a very interesting point, Shanawaz, and impromptu, Neela, I would like to just quickly, get your thoughts on just this particular interesting topic, right? We spoke about this, huge investments by the GEs and Siemens of the world in creating this awesome technology, the Edison platforms and the Teams platforms, etc. And we have skepticism on how really useful they are. And you have done a lot of research. I mean, at least have been part of the research or seen the research on this area. You've seen on the ground. How do you think, where is it that these things need to meet together, and how do you suggest that this partnership can really take off to help, at the end of the day, the end patients or users?
Well, at the end of it, it is about humans, like I said before, and it's interesting when you look at face recognition. Some of those were populated and didn't have enough diverse information, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that you're getting good sources for these kinds of machine learning and AI for diverse populations. And then everyone else has also mentioned how individual it is. So you're really talking about an incredible amount of perturbations of what can actually happen. But where the value is going to come is where you're able to hit certain populations, like know when is an immunotherapy going to be the right application for you, given what you've already had, so that you can get the best care that you want. And we're just not there yet. We have the Apple Watch, and we have all these doctors who are saying they're getting called because of issues from their Apple Watch, and it's all got to come together because we're talking about humans adopting these kinds of measures with real science, with real evidence, with applying it to real use cases. And that's why collaborating with the doctors in the hospitals really makes sense, putting it in a workflow and really having those kinds of strong collaborations, which is some of what we're doing at Baptist Health South Florida, because the data is great, but unless you get that context and you really work through it in a real world application, you still have more of a theoretical problem solution instead of a practical application that are going to be dealing with the care of people.
Interesting. Sarika, I'll quickly bring you in here, right? Again, now you've heard the different perspectives of, the technology guys, the providers, the pharma folks. In your mind, where is the scope for deeper collaboration, partnership, etc., mainly on the technology side? I mean, you're the forefront of technology partnership for many years.
So I couldn't agree more with everybody. Everybody has the point of view, and I think all of us are pretty much saying the same thing, I think. But let me take everybody when technology players are building, they're not building a product, but they're building an ecosystem, and that's a fundamental shift in the mindset. GE is not building something that they're going to be in the market with the GE label. Well, they are, but they're going to be inviting more people to participate in that ecosystem. Siemens, the same thing, and all of us have understood it takes a village. It's not going to be an individual person or a particular one company that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take a very, very close collaboration amongst all of us, different players, different stakeholders, different types of stakeholders, providers, payers, technology, government. So let me take a little, even higher up perspective. So everybody within their capacity is, providing avenues for partnership, and they are partnering with startups. They're partnering with adjacent technology players to build the ecosystem. But I think the DTX, the digital therapeutics, is going to need a lot more collaboration. So and Shah just mentioned the difference between digital health technology in general and digital therapeutics is digital therapeutics is evidence-based, clinically validated technology platform. So you have to provide the evidence for to be able to the platform to be able to work. Now, to get the meaningful benefits of those solutions, the solution has to be used by bigger population. If they have to be used by bigger population, then the payers need to start reimbursing them, because without that, it's not going to have larger deployment. If the payers need to start reimbursing them, not just as a companion app or a supportive therapy, but perhaps an independent solution, then regulatory authorities have to be fast-paced to examine the value, the safety, the efficacy, and approve that solution. If they need to approve that solution with the accelerated, fast-paced velocity that everybody's expecting, then the companies that are building this must include the functionality that clearly points out the improvements, the evidence of cost saving, outcome improvement, all of the above. So it's not just a person has to partner with a couple of other people. It's everybody that has to work in tandem in order to get this well-connected, integrated world to a next quantum, next orbit. Because as Neela said, as Janet said, it's there. Technology is there, but it's still not there. Everybody's wearing an Apple Watch, but the data is still not being used. So it has to be validated before it can have a large-scale deployment.
This is a very interesting discussion, and thank you for your perspective, Sarika. We're getting some, very pertinent audience questions as well. So I'll weave in a couple of those in right now. We heard a lot about data and how data quality is important, the understanding of data is important, and then taking it to evidence basis that data, right? But the underlying thing, and I'll maybe get Janet in first, and Doug also mentioned this earlier. I'll get his viewpoint as well. So Janet, from your perspective, the question is, data is great, but because this is not like straightforward, which website I'm going, which shoe I'm buying kind of data. People are a little more worried about their privacy concerns here. So Janet, in your experience, what are like the top couple of areas or things that you do to assuage this concern that people would have?
Yeah, I think it's really partnering with patient advocate groups and patients directly so that they can understand what we're doing with data. I mean, it's actually a very new science when you think about it, which is really quite intriguing. But I think being very transparent, explaining what you're doing with it, showing the benefit. And I can speak, I mean, one of the reasons I joined Flatiron 7 years ago is working in a rural community and just having the NCCN guidelines to guide my treatment planning. Like, my patients didn't fit into those NCCN guidelines. I had patients working, on ranches 3 hours away from a healthcare setting. Like, I needed real world data. And so I used to talk a lot with my patients to say, this is the dream of where we need to be, that we could have a collaborative conversation, you and I, based on me saying, 100 patients just like you, here's the treatments they got and how should we do it, and have a much more shared decision making. So I think being really transparent, I think the ownership is on tech companies like Flatiron to ensure the utmost security, de-identifying patient name and any type of data element that could identify them is critical, and we need to be very thoughtful through that process. And I think data is messy. And so someone brought up, like, payers need to start paying. Like, we need to improve the data going into the EHR so that the data sets coming out are more beneficial and helpful.
Interesting. Doug, your take on this, and I have another very interesting question for you.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean, this is a really rich topic. This whole discussion has been really great. So just big picture wise, what I see just going from data all the way to implementation is, the first thing is collecting this data. And I think Janet just really nailed it. The whole issue with data collection is the quality of data and collecting meaningful data really on a scalable level, right? And then having all of that data, all of those pieces connecting up together, whether it's before the trial and having the patient histories, whether it's the lifestyle data during the trials, or even the outcomes data, after, right? But it's collecting all of that data. And then I think it's having, the biggest challenge that I'm sure Suresh Kumar is facing is the interoperability of that data on the platform, right? It's just, this data needs to be interoperable, connected, and it just needs to connect. And so I think once you have that you can connect all that data, you can contextualize it. Then once you've connected all that up, you need to make it actionable. And I think that's what Neela said. I think the biggest hard spot in this is not the technology, as everybody has said. I mean, the hardest spot now to really get tech into industry is the workflow and integration and having the incentives aligned. Okay, and to get that, we're going to need that integration. We're going to need the validation. There's a lot of technology that we see out there that's just, it's calling out issues, right? Hey, we found this, we found that. But you know what, if it's not adjacent to an answer, okay, you're just adding costs to the system. Bottom line, right? So we're really going to have to orient all these solutions, what they are now, to basically a piece of land, right? Where people can really do, in this whole context of value-based healthcare, really demonstrate to the whole system that this is valuable. From the data collection to the curating to the actionability, and getting that data to the person who can do something with it. And it's just not them acting on that data. Hopefully they'll take that action and they can improve it. So the whole thing just gets more and more valuable as we go along. And then for every piece of data that gets added to this, the whole system gets richer. So that I think that's.
So Doug, interesting question for you is, in pharma specifically, how do you think the business model is going to be different in a digital therapeutics age versus the traditional one that we are seeing now? And you've been focused on business mostly, so I thought this would be a great question for you.
Where's the money, right? So I get that question a lot, actually. So it depends on what kind of digital implementation we're talking about. So if we're talking about, probably very similar to Shah at Regeneron, when we're talking about digital, incorporating it into the pipeline, right? It's usually an efficiency argument. It's a very expensive proposition. It's probably the most capital intensive proposition to develop a drug, right? So we're looking for efficiency measures. So there's cost reduction. That's a KPI. There's efficiency, and then there's GTM. So go to market. So if you're on the market early, if you look at peak sales, and I got there, 6 months earlier, there's a economic value associated with that, right? If you're looking at, the more standalone digital opportunities, then the ROI it's revenue. You're going to market sooner, and so if you're looking at revenue, you're looking at users, you're looking at platforms, it's a whole different, set of metrics, and then trying to grow that in the context where you're also gathering evidence at the same time. The real difference is for the pharma, traditionally, the way we develop products, okay, is, yes, it's an MVP, okay, but it's not a minimum viable product. It's actually, it's a maximum viable product, right? We want the perfect product to go to market and be there, okay? That's very different than when I was working with Sarika. We, in the past, we looked at minimum viable products. And minimal viable products where we get them out to market, we'd improve it all along the way, and it would get better. So it's just a very different mindset. The investment model is different. The return measures are different. A really rich discussion. It's a lot of education to take people through, but really this whole migration of these models is really enabled by technology.
Interesting. Right? Thank you so much, Doug. Yeah. So what I'll do is, and we have, I think we can go on for a very long time, but unfortunately we have 4 to 5 minutes left. So what I'll do is I'll just get almost all of your take on one particular interesting question, right? And if from your experience and what you believe the future would be, and if you could actually have a crystal ball, I would like each of you to, tell us your top 2 predictions for the future. And this future could be a little long term, right? It could be 4 years, 5 years from now. But what would be your top 1 or 2 predictions for digital therapeutics in the future? And Suresh, you can take the first jab at that.
Sure. So today it's all around the chronic disease management, and it's more of very reactive. I think the future is going to be extremely proactive, and it's not far away. A very simple example, today you have nicotine patches, right? So can you have now, patches with sensors and vital information? With all these 3 together, you can actually have a continuous drug delivery, which is completely automated, whereas the individual is going through a normal day-to-day activity. This can actually prevent quite a lot of adverse events. This is not far away. This is going to happen very soon, right? And of course, the future should be, today, so much of lifestyle monitoring data is available, but nothing is coming out of that. So there is some evidence that it is very useful in the obesity avoidance and management, but we need to look at expanding the scope to cardiac and more life-threatening ailments. That is the future.
Interesting. Thank you, Suresh. Neela, to you, your top prediction.
I think that patients will still have relationships with their primary care physician, but there also will
and
be
not just with bots.
well, there will also be with bots, I'm sure, wherever there's efficiencies and the ability to make things better, and a layering of the different services in telemedicine from telemedicine, virtual sources, bots, wearables. And this is really going to make an impact as we have an aging population and we're taking care of our elderly parents, So I think that it'll lead to more personalized care and interventions. And I like the idea of going from reactive to proactive to having better health.
Interesting. Shanawaz, your take on this one?
I think everyone has said. I think the only thing I would leave everyone with is that a patient in more control, and I think that's where it's heading, and it'll have many applications, but from anywhere from improving quality of life to curing disease to increasing lifespan. I think ultimately that's where we're headed, slowly but surely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want more control to treat myself, though. I thought the doctor knows best. I'm just kidding.
I think and maybe that's not the right word for that. Choices. I think choices of and to having full transparency and to have the flexibility and to know. I think somebody talked about digital twin. I think that's where I think everything is headed, and there will be many applications which comes out of that.
Cool. Thanks. Janet, from your perspective, it could be narrow, it could be broad, whatever you think is the future.
Same, and I'm so pleased, Shah, that you brought it back to the patient, because as the clinician here, I'm the same. I mean, I would love to see these big real-world data sets in the hands of the practicing clinicians. In our case, it's oncology, but cardiology anywhere, so that there is shared decision making. So it is a partnership with your provider. I think that's super critical, and I think as we test the methodology around AI and machine learning, that we do move, and I've mentioned this already, is to a proactive space. So your clinician knows when to contact someone, when somebody might be getting into trouble, and it's not them going to the ED or urgent care. Like I don't think that's that far off, to be honest with you. We have the data, we're understanding it more. It's taken a long time, but I think we're closer to that goal than we were.
Perfect. Sarika, your take on this one?
I am with everybody. It's patient and personalization of care at every step of the way. It could be, simply, tailoring the treatment plan, the diet, the exercise, and the lifestyle. Sometimes it's probably improving the compliance by just, a little bit motivation or nudging. To all the way to, as Shah said, social genomics, understanding the impact of, your race, your ethnicity, and how the drugs impact a particular a set of people because of the genomics data being available, and personalized medicine for that. And everything in between. We're not too far off. We started with a small step, but I think we're going in that direction.
Perfect. Good. I'll let you have the last and final word in this panel. And what does your crystal ball tell all of us?
Yeah, thanks, Siddhan. I think I already talked about it in length. I mean, if I look in the crystal ball, what we see at the future of healthcare is the digital twin. To answer the question how we are, I mean, it will be patient-centric, will be more individualized, and also, let's say, the patient or the individual will be in control. And healthcare won't be reactive, it will be proactive, supported by artificial intelligence in case something goes in the wrong direction, to bring you back on the right track, supported by the AI pathway companions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gerd. And like I said, this has been a very, very interesting panel. Thank you so much for not just taking the time, but giving your candid insights to all of us. I will allow my colleague Ovia to share the closing note and the final take on the panel. Thank you so much, everyone.